In today's video, I'm going to be walking you through the process of how I create a butter dish from start to finish. If you're a regular viewer of mine, as you can probably tell, this video is a little bit different, and I'm actually filming a voiceover for this one so I can explain my process a little bit better. Gotten some requests to do a video in this style, so I thought, why not try it out? Let me know what you think of this style of video in the comments down below. So I'm starting out with a nice fresh bag of clay. There's nothing like a fresh bag of clay. The most beautiful texture to throw with. A butter dish contains two components, which is the base and the lid. So I'm weighing out 2 pieces of clay, one for the base and one for the lid. The base is about 1 pound of clay and the lid is about 1 pound and 4 ounces of clay. So I'm wedging each ball of clay to get rid of any air pockets. There's not too many in these, considering it's a fresh bag of clay. If it's reclaim that I'm using, then I wedge each ball of clay a lot more than you can see now. I prefer to use bats when throwing my butter dishes, especially when it comes to the base. And the base is the first thing I'm starting off with because the size of the base coincides with the size of the lid that I create. So I'm starting out by centering my clay and coning it up and down to get rid of any residual air pockets. I like to keep my videos in real time as opposed to speeding them up in the throwing process because I like to show you just how slow the movements actually are. So now it's time to start creating the base of the butter dish. I'm starting out by pressing down on the clay to create a thick disc. So I'm measuring out the disc size to 5 inches on my shrink ruler. So it's not 5 actual inches, it's 5 inches plus 12% shrinkage. And now I'm gonna start opening up my clay. I'm just checking the thickness of the base. I tend to throw my bases on the thinner side because I don't really trim the bottom of my pieces all that much. I prefer my pieces to have a flat bottom with a slight indentation in the center. Once my base is at the thickness, I'm opening up the clay and I'm opening up the inside part to about 4 inches or so because that's where the butter is going to sit. And I'm leaving a nice thick ring of clay on the exterior section because that's where I'm going to create the well to put the butter dish lid. And I'm just compressing the bottom to avoid any cracks or warping. As you can see here, I'm using my index finger to press down in the middle of that thick section of clay that I left to create a well, which makes 2 walls, one interior wall and one exterior wall. And I spend a few minutes perfecting the well and each wall. I throw the exterior wall just a little bit higher than the interior wall so it's easier to trim this later. And I spend a few minutes kind of messing around with each wall, making sure my measurements are correct. I want the interior section to be between 4 and 4.5 inches, and the exterior section is probably about 5 to 5 1/4. I'm just compressing the base once again, and I'm cleaning up the rim and interior of the dish. And I forgot to show this on camera, but I measured the interior well section of the butter dish, and the width of that is the width that my lid needs to be. The lid needs to fit snugly in between the 2 walls, so that's why I throw the base first and then the lid, and then I throw another base and another lid. So I pretty much do one butter dish at a time. Now it's time to start on the lid. The lid of a butter dish is very simple and straightforward. All it is a tall bowl shape. So I'm just centering my clay and coning it up and down, and then I'm starting to throw my bowl. The difference between the butter dish lid and typical bowls that I throw though is I'm leaving an extra thick base to be able to round out the bottom of the bowl into a dome shape. And I'm barely opening up the clay to maintain a bit of a dome shape. And I'm just compressing the clay a bit and starting to pull up my walls. And when I'm throwing my lid, I'm just referring to the measurements that I took of my base. I'm making sure the rim fits inside the well of the dish. I'm sopping up the leftover water at the base, and I'm getting rid of the clay slop from the exterior of the bowl with a brass rib. And here's the lid of the butter dish. It'll completely come together in the trimming stage. My bowls have been sitting under plastic overnight to get to the perfect leather hard consistency for my trimming. And I actually like to trim my pieces without using lugs of clay. I just wet the wheel with a bit of water and kind of suction the bowl to the wheel. And I also like to tap center to center my pieces. Once my bowl is center, I press it down to make a nice suction. I'm trimming off quite a bit of clay, as you can see, which is why I left a nice thick base, so I have a bit of wiggle room to create my preferred shape. As you can see, the nice dome shape is coming to life, and it's looking less like a bowl and more like a lid. Trimming right here is another reason why I like to use a section method when trimming, is I can get all the way down to the rim and up to create a nice even shape throughout. Now I'm just using a thin metal rib to smooth the clay and burnish it so there's no grog poking out and any lines are smoothed out. I also prefer not to have any throwing or trimming lines because of the way that I decorate my pieces. While my lid is still centered to the wheel, I'm going to be adding my knob, so I'm just slipping and scoring and adding a little ball of clay. I kind of forgot how much clay I used for this, maybe 2.5 ounces. I'm just making sure the ball of clay is nice and stuck on, and then I start throwing the knob of clay. I'm just starting by centering the little ball of clay as best as I can and coning up and down. This is definitely a little bit of a harder technique to try, but once you master it, it gets pretty easy. Once the clay is centered, I use my pinky finger to shape it into a knob-like shape, and I just kind of mess around with it for a couple minutes till it's at the shape that I like. You can create any knob shape that you like. I just prefer this triangular one, and I'm just cleaning it up with a sponge. And I'm pulling my lid off the wheel and cleaning up the rim. The base is exceedingly simple to trim. All I do is wet it, suction, and center the base of the clay. So I'm just evening out the wall and rounding out the corners of the base. I didn't even trim the bottom because it was already at the thickness that I liked, so I'm just burnishing it nice and smooth. And then I clean it up with the mud tool sponge and wipe off the rim to clean that up as well. Once my lid gets to the harder side of leather hard, it is time for my favorite part, which is decorating. I prefer to use stencils that I create for my designs so I can mess around with the placement, and I prefer duplicates to be as consistent as possible with each other. It also makes it a lot easier so I don't have to sit there and hand sketch every single One, that would take a lot of unnecessary time when I could just design a stencil and use that for each piece. So I'm starting out by very lightly tracing out my stencil, and for this butter dish, I'm doing cheetahs. I've been wanting to do some type of big cat in my style, and I thought cheetahs would be pretty nice because I love the look of them. Once I'm done with tracing my stencils, I start carving out my design, and I always like to do a little design on the knob of my pieces. So here I'm doing a little leaf, which I'll also be adding on the sides later. So you can just enjoy some nice carving footage now. So now I'm starting to carve out all the designs on my butter dish. I'm using this Diamond Core L1 stylus tool. This tool is amazing because it feels as easy as drawing with a pencil. You want to wait until your clay is on the harder side of leather hard to use this tool, because if it's too wet, it'll just simply kind of squish into the clay instead of carve cleanly through. It takes about an average of half an hour to initially carve out my designs. It feels so odd to be filming a voiceover now because most of you guys have probably never heard my voice ever unless you've been watching me for years, unless you've seen some of my old videos that I have since taken down a long time ago. So yeah, this feels quite a bit different, and I don't know. Let me know how you like this style. I'll be quiet now and you can enjoy some meditative carving. So after I'm done carving out every single one of my designs, I always carve this type of texture in the background of my pieces. I prefer to do this because it adds a bit more interest to each piece. It gets rid of any lines that I don't like on the piece, and I feel like it kind of marks each piece as mine. I mean, I've never seen anybody else do this with these carved animal styles, and I feel like when people see it, they'll kind of know it as my work. And I feel like this texture makes every piece of my collection, no matter the animal on it, kind of belong together in a way. So you can have a cheetah mug with a chicken olive oil bottle, with snake tumblers, and it'll all match together on a shelf. It takes a lot more time to add this texture than it would not to do it, but I feel like it's just the finishing touch on my pieces. So once I'm done carving my pieces, I wait until they get to bone dry so I can clean them up. I clean up every single one of my carved pieces with the toothbrush, and I always do it outside because, as you can see, a lot of dust is created by cleaning up the lines with this technique. Even though I do it outside, I also wear a mask because sometimes the dust tends to come up right in my face no matter which way I brush it. So just to be safe and protect my lungs, I always do this outside with a mask on. This step makes a huge difference with the texture of the piece. It smooths out all the lines and gets rid of any little pieces of clay in it and makes the piece look overall more refined. Another one of my favorite parts is next, which is painting. I like to use a mixture of Amico and Laguna underglazes. So I'm starting off by painting my cheetahs with a nice light yellow underglaze. I don't show it on camera, but I do 2 coats of this underglaze. I prefer to do the second coat off camera so I can be as close to the piece as I can to get any little details that I've missed while filming on camera, because painting on camera is definitely a bit difficult because to show it on camera, I have to paint at an angle that I'm not 100% comfortable with. So I prefer to just show 1 coat on camera and do the second coat, which fixes any imperfections off camera. I switch between a thicker brush and a thinner brush when I'm painting so I can get more details with the thin brush and cover more surface area with the thick brush. Now you can just enjoy some meditative painting of the cheetahs. I'm painting the leaves with this gorgeous avocado green color, and I'm using this tiny brush so I can do just 1 thick coat instead of doing 2 thinner coats of this glaze. The leaves take quite a while to paint, so I prefer just to do 1 very thick coat instead of having to go back again and do a second thin coat. And this thinner brush just lets me paint thicker coats in these smaller crevices. So lately, while I've been painting, I've been listening to audiobooks, and right now I'm listening to the Harry Potter audiobook series, but I'm almost done with it. So if you have any audiobook suggestions, definitely leave some for me down below. I like books of all different genres. It doesn't really matter to me as long as it's a good read, or I guess in my case, a good listening to. Now it's time to start the little details. I'm going in with a pink color for the inner ear color of the cheetahs, and I'm starting to paint the black details. So I'm painting the little black nose and the blacks of the eyes. Now I'm starting to paint the cheetah's facial coloring. I perfected a lot of this off camera because it's so difficult to film these little details on camera without pretty much having my head covering the shot. And now I'm painting the little spots of each cheetah. I'm doing a very thick coat of these spots, so I only have to do 1 coat of this, because it would definitely be quite painstaking to do between 2 and 3 coats of this black. These fine details are where my pieces really come together, and it makes me so excited for the final look. I did actually tweak the cheetah design a little bit after this piece. I'm always improving my designs. I think it's crazy how adding just a simple tiny white dot of glaze to the eyes just makes it come to life. This is the final step to painting my pieces, and the next step is bisque firing. Here's a little sneak peek of some more pieces that I have. All of these pieces will be available in my next holiday collection, coming either late November or early December. Loading a kiln is kind of like Tetris. You try to fit as many pieces as you possibly can in one kiln load. I bisque fire all my pieces to cone 04. This is the next morning, and as you can see, the underglaze colors have totally brightened up after the bisque firing. In between the time these pieces were firing, I also built a brand new work table, which is so exciting. I got rid of that super ugly small one. Before I glaze, I just rinse all of my bisque pieces because there may be some residual dust from brushing it in the bone dry stage. I don't want my glaze to do anything funky, so I just take the time to rinse each piece. And once they're dry, I'm glazing the interior of the lid with a nice creamy chino glaze. I technically don't have to glaze the interior of the lid. I just like how it looks in the finished piece. It just looks a bit more complete. With the base, I'm only going to be glazing the section where the butter would go because I want to be able to fire these two pieces together in the kiln. I do not recommend firing butter dishes like this together. If your glaze is very runny, you have to make sure your glaze is very stable because if it's runny, it may drip into the well and you won't ever be able to pull those pieces apart. This glaze specifically is incredibly stable and does not drip. I just apply 2 coats of this specific glaze. I also like to brush this glaze on because with dipping glazes, you can get drips on the outside and it'd be kind of a pain to clean it out of my carved lines. And I don't want any type of glaze color in my carving lines, so I just prefer to take the extra time to brush on my glaze. The most exciting part is coming, which is glaze firing. I fire my pieces to cone 6. And I get a lot of questions about this little brick. I keep my kiln lid propped until it reaches 1,000 degrees because I don't have a downdraft vent on my kiln. Here's the finished fired piece, but this isn't the last step. The very last step to my pottery is sanding the bottoms. I use a 240 and 120 grit sanders from Diamond Core Tools. These sanders are a game changer when it comes to my pottery because it makes the base so incredibly smooth and gets rid of any rough bits, especially because I use a groggy stoneware clay and I don't want to scratch any of your tabletops. Here is the finished butter dish. All my designs always go 360 degrees around my pieces, so no matter which way you place it, you get to see some pretty carvings. And as you can see, these butter dishes perfectly fit a nice half-cup stick size of butter. Here's a few of the other butter dish designs I created for my next restock. That's the end of today's video, and I will see you guys all with my next creation.